Our first Izzy Award tonight goes to the unique publication Jewish Currents for its coverage last year of the slaughter of civilians in Gaza, including a brilliant article by the Palestinian-American writer with roots in Gaza, Sarah Aziza, and for its in-depth coverage of the broader Israel-Palestine issue, and for its coverage last year in our country of the repression and smears against anti-genocide, pro-Palestinian dissenters, especially against students, many of them Jewish students. I remind you that this coverage that they won the award for was last year, before Trump retook power in January. The Izzy judges praised Jewish Currents for offering, quote, an essential counterpoint to a restrictive public conversation about Jewish politics, culture, and identity. Its coverage recalls the best of I.F. Stone, unquote. People may not know that one of the high points of Izzy Stone's journalistic career was his vivid, week after week, on-the-ground coverage of the Jewish displaced persons, survivors of the Nazi Holocaust, who fled to what is now Israel. And this reporting culminated in Izzy's 1946 book, Underground to Palestine. Within 2 decades, Izzy Stone had become a prominent, vocal critic of what he saw as Israeli racism, Israeli expansionism, and for that well-informed criticism, he became in 1973 one of the first Jewish Americans, with many, many to follow, to be denounced as a self-hating, guilt-ridden Jew. When I think of Jewish Currents, and I'm a little bit strange, I think of a famous ad campaign in the New York City subways and beyond, 1960s, for Levy's Jewish rye bread. And these ubiquitous ads featured either an Irish New York cop or a photo of a Catholic choir boy or a Asian American youth or an African American youth taking a bite out of the bread with the big, bold tagline, "You don't have to be Jewish to love Levy's Jewish rye bread." And if you Google it, you'll even find a picture of a smiling Malcolm X who asked a photographer to take a picture of him next to one of these ads. What's my point here? You don't have to be Jewish to read Jewish Currents or to benefit from going to its exceptional website, jewishcurrents.org. Accepting the Izzy Award on behalf of Jewish Currents is its senior reporter, Alex Kane. Alex has had his work published all over the place, The Guardian, The Nation, Fair.org, In These Times, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you so much, Mickey and Marcy, and for everyone here. Thank you so much for having me and for giving Jewish Currents an Izzy Award. We're really, really honored. It's truly inspiring to be given an award named after Izzy Stone. In preparing for this speech, I began to read some of Izzy Stone's columns during the 1950s when Wisconsin Senator Joe McCarthy held a series of televised hearings airing the theory that communists and Soviet spies had infiltrated every corner of American life, universities, the film industry. When McCarthy began his inquisition there was very little pushback from the Washington establishment, even though the senator slash and burn tactics would wind up destroying the careers of many, many, many people, including many government employees. Despite the damage McCarthy was doing, President Eisenhower told his aides, quote, "I will not get into the gutter with this guy. That is, he's going to be silent." But McCarthy's army hearings in 1954, focusing on alleged communist infiltration of all places, the US Army, changed the tenor of the Washington discourse. Eisenhower still wouldn't directly denounce McCarthy, but he told his staff to present information that would discredit him. Others also spoke out against McCarthy. In March of that year, I.F. Stone wrote about the belated pushback to McCarthy in an article in his weekly newsletter entitled, "But It's Not Just Joe McCarthy." Stone specifically references a speech on the Senate floor given by Ralph Flanders, a liberal Republican senator from Vermont, who said, in so many words, McCarthy was an ineffective showboat who served as a distraction from the titanic foreign policy struggles of our day in Korea, Indochina, and Europe. But Stone was not out to praise Flanders. Instead, he noted that while now there were mainstream Republicans criticizing McCarthy, they were also adopting his premises, his ideological premises. In his Senate speech, Flanders spoke of the Cold War as a crisis in the age-long warfare between God and the devil for the souls of men. Flanders also said that there is much to praise and much to deplore in McCarthyism, and that it was okay with him if McCarthy cleaned communists out of American society. In Stone's analysis, this was a, quote, feeble and hysterical speech, one that demonstrated, quote, how the center of gravity in American politics has been pushed so far right that such childish nightmares are welcomed as the expression of liberal statesmanship. He points out that the Senate Republican reply to McCarthy's silly communist coddling charges against the Army is to launch a formal investigation of their own into communist infiltration. So Stone's point was that the opposition to McCarthyism expressed by Flanders and others was not opposition to its ideological underpinnings, but rather to the unsavory tactics, the wild accusations that swept up innocent people that the senator used. The echoes with our own era of McCarthyism, as congressional committees hunt for professors and students for the thought crime of solidarity with Palestinians, and as students are detained and facing deportation for the crime of condemning Israel's destruction of Gaza, are unmistakable. Indeed, if I.F. Stone were writing today, he could easily title his column, "It's Not Just Donald Trump." The groundwork for Trump's anti-Palestinian McCarthyism was laid by the Biden administration and the Democratic Party more broadly, alongside mainstream Israel advocacy organizations. Democratic Party rhetoric may have differed from Republicans on the margins, but both parties shared the same premises. For instance, 133 House Democrats voted for legislation last year that would mandate that the Department of Education, while investigating allegations of anti-Semitism on campus, use the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, better known as the IRA definition. That definition conflates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. 21 Democrats, amid the Columbia University encampments last year, urged Columbia trustees to, quote, act decisively to end the protest. This was the Democratic Party and liberal institutions more broadly helping propagate the idea that pro-Palestinian speech and activism was anti-Semitic and that there was a need for a muscular response to such activism. Now, as Trump adopts those very same premises and uses them to enact an authoritarian assault on civil society, some mainstream Democrats are getting cold feet. Take Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, for example, senator from this state as well. Last week, Schumer and 4 other senators sent a letter to Trump decrying his assault on universities, which the president has justified by citing anti-Semitism on campus. Quote, "Stop disgracefully weaponizing anti-Semitism to attack universities," Schumer said. Well said. And yet in his new book, Anti-Semitism in America, released last month, the senator charges Columbia University with, quote, "a widespread failure to discipline both faculty and students who engaged in overtly anti-Semitic activities." He said this despite Columbia's troubling measures such as banning Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace, calling in the NYPD to break up the student encampment, and suspending and expelling many student activists. Schumer is emblematic of a Democratic establishment that helped whip up a manufactured panic over anti-Semitism on college campuses, only to now lament the consequences of that panic when power is placed in the hands of a demagogue. At Jewish Currents, we have spent much of the past 19 months, since October 7th, chronicling this worrying trend, in which liberalism and its avatars eagerly advance anti-Palestinian repression. In fact, it was the subject of much of the work that we submitted for the Izzy Awards. Will Alden's investigation, entitled Defunding Dissent, exposed how liberal philanthropists who generously funded causes such as abortion care were withdrawing financial support over abortion funds' opposition to Israel's bombardment of Gaza, which many experts call a genocide. My piece reported on how the Biden administration, in using Title VI of the Civil Rights Act to stifle dissent on college campuses, had handed Trump a potential instrument of repression that paved the way for future abuses. Indeed, Trump is right now using Title VI as the basis for stripping federal funding from various universities. The scholars, Adam Haber and Matilda Figlerowicz, documented how media outlets such as CNN justified the police crackdown on the encampment movement last spring as, quote, a necessary defense against lawless mobs who pose an anti-Semitic threat to the university, and in so doing, helped create a moral panic around anti-Semitism that would become the basis for stripping federal funding from schools and the rollback of First Amendment protections. We have done this work while keeping our eye on the horrors of Gaza and the transformations the genocide has wrought in Israel, in Palestine, in American Jewish life, and in those who are watching the horrors unfold as we speak. Sarah Aziza's article on what it means to watch a genocide on one's phone probed the limits of witnessing human rights atrocities in Gaza and explored what a more active form of witness might entail, rooted in, quote, embodiment, on sacrifice, mourning, and resisting what is seen. Maya Rosen's piece on October 7th tourism focused on how solidarity tours to the sites where Hamas militants attacked Israel were reinscribing American Jews' sense of victimhood, and with it, solidifying a consensus that Israel's continued aggression was necessary and just. And that's us. Our post-October 7th work built on years of beat reporting, delivering the sources and analyses that allowed us to take on this moment. For years, in fact, we were often one of the only outlets covering the phenomenon of how powerful actors were trying to crush the speech and organizing capacity of Palestinians and their allies. This was partially because the advocacy of mainstream Jewish groups were deemed too niche, even when they were successful in lobbying government officials around the country, and partially because it seemed alarmist to many to suggest that, say, the adoption of IRA would have any real effect on criminal and civil law. We authored numerous investigative reports on the Anti-Defamation League, one of the most influential Jewish groups in the country, documenting how they have ignored and pushed aside their own civil rights division in favor of pushing for repressive speech crackdowns. We audited their anti-Semitism numbers, which many media outlets consider a gold standard, and tracked how their insistence on the conflation of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism inflated such figures. We have tracked the ways that the IRA definition has made its way into federal and state law, including hate crimes law and laws banning discrimination in educational institutions. And now the Trump administration is scouring social media accounts of those who want visas to visit the US, instructing consular officials to deny visas to those deemed anti-Semitic under the IRA definition. It won't stop here, as anti-Semitism has become the favored tool on the part of this administration for targeting not just Palestinians, but Arabs, Muslims, progressives, leftists, and other populations deemed a nuisance to Trump's autocratic ambitions. We are now living in a new McCarthy era, with dynamics on display that I.F. Stone would have been all too familiar with. The forces of repression, including the Democratic establishment, right-wing Republicans, and mainstream Jewish groups, are colluding to destroy careers, target immigrants, and lock people up in jail, all to keep U.S. foreign policy on its aimless, bloody track. It is in these moments when American democracy and civil liberties are most under threat. The ideas of the Palestine Solidarity Movement, that genocide is wrong, that no state has the right to create a regime based on ethnic supremacy, are ideas that threaten American power and the myths that sustain that power. Because if they are wrong in Israel-Palestine, they must be wrong in the United States. The success or failure of civil society's collective pushback against the current authoritarian regime will be the measure of how strong American democracy is, and indeed, whether it will survive yet another moment of far right-wing reaction. We don't yet know how this story will end. But I know that Jewish Currents will continue to chronicle these dangerous attacks and to write the first draft of history. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alex.